To a very special moment now. And it's hard to know really where to start with this man, but I'll give it a whirl. Kumar Sangakkara is a veteran of 115 Test matches, and he's among the greatest cricketers of all time. He is one of only 11 players to have scored 10,000 Test runs, and indeed reached this mark in 195 innings, exactly the same as Brian Lara and Sachin Tendulkar, and in one less innings than Ricky Ponting. Given that he has always batted at 3 and kept wicket for a good deal of his career, you can mount a very strong argument indeed that he should sit atop the list of the 10,000 run scorers. While statistics tell only a little of the Sangakkara story, it would be remiss not to celebrate a few in particular. Of the 10,000 run getters in Test cricket, only Jacques Kallis averages more than Kumar's stunning 55.80. He has scored 30 centuries, a startling 8 of them being double hundreds. Only Brian Lara with 9 and Sir Donald Bradman with 12 have scored more Test double hundreds. And with his dear friend Mahela Jayawardene, he holds the record for the highest ever partnership, 624 for the That was for the third, back in 2006, for the third wicket against South Africa, whose attack was headed by Dale Steyn and Makhaya Ntini. And this is before we consider the leisurely 10,915 runs in 337 limited over internationals and the 330 catches and 81 stumpings that have accompanied them. Kumar, who has led his country with distinction, is one of the game's most decorated players. In 2011, he was Wisden's leading cricketer in the world, and in 2012, the International Cricket Council's Cricketer of the Year. And to reaffirm his universal popularity, he was the ICC's People's Choice as the game's preeminent player in both 2011 and in 2012. Socially conscious, he is an eloquent and brave spokesman for Sri Lankan cricketer, and in 2011 was lauded for his Calvary Spirit of Cricket lecture delivered at Lord's. He believes fervently that cricket can be a voice, a force for change, especially in the game's developing world. He is a man of modesty and humanity, the sort of man who on the spur of the moment quietly pays from his own pocket for 2 buses to take children from a township in Cape Town to an international match at Newlands. To this day, he would be surprised anybody knew this. We are fortunate that this special cricket person is with us tonight. Please welcome Kumar Sangakkara. Great to have you with us, and we're relieved, in fact, that you're with us after this sort of setback in Melbourne. We were just pinning so many pins in Mitchell Johnson Joel's, you wouldn't believe it. How was the hand?
The hand's getting along pretty well, actually. When I had the injury, the usual practice is when you're injured, you're given a couple of days if you have surgery, and then say, thank you very much, you're off home. And my wife and I discussed what are we going to do. And then I had a couple of commitments, one for CCC line in Sri Lanka, which is an anti-suicide hotline, and of course the LBW Trust. And both of them were commitments that I care deeply about. So, and also the added attraction of a holiday with the family, to be honest. So the finger is pretty good. I use it to scare my children now. If they don't sleep at night, it's still a bit crooked. The dreaded Captain Hook story comes out, but I've enjoyed my time in Melbourne.
Yeah, well, it's lovely to see you. The injury cost you, of course, the one opportunity perhaps in your Test cricket life, without wanting to be presumptuous, but you are 35, the one chance perhaps to play in the Sydney Cricket Ground. And I know how much you're involved in the history of the game. Your dad always encouraged you, didn't he, to take an interest in what's gone before?
I am 35, but I'm also from the subcontinent, so you never know. Yes, I think it is a great pity, especially from a personal point of view, that I didn't get to play at the SCG. The MCG Boxing Day Test match and one Test match here, I think they compare very much on equal terms with Lords. And to try and get on the honours board here from a personal point of view, or to win a Test match at any of these venues, I think that's what really motivates cricketers around the world, batsmen, bowlers, teams, to come to these great venues and play in front of people who appreciate great Test cricket, who come in droves to watch Test matches, which is a very rare occurrence these days in the world. So yes, disappointed. I think my father would be too, but such is life.
Is your father still such a powerful influence in your life?
I think he has always been the greatest influence in my life in the sense of sport and cricket especially. I took to cricket quite late. I started playing tennis. Soon realized my tennis was not going anywhere. It was also, by yourself on a court at 35 degrees every day of the year is not fun. Cricket was much more attractive. A lot of friends at school playing cricket, so I decided to switch to cricket. But whatever sport I did, my father always took the opportunity to coach me. And he played tennis for fun. Cricket, not so seriously, but he had this marvelous ability to read the game, to read about the game, and formulate his very own unique coaching formula, which in modern day terms, many of you would call torture. So growing up, he always told me one thing: if you're doing something for fun, that's fine, but if you're devoting a lot of time to something, do it right. And he took it upon himself to make sure that I did it right. So I spent quite a few years in my childhood being woken up at 6:37 and then taken outside into the backyard. He had built a tennis wall. In those days, you practiced against the wall as a young tennis player, which doubled up as a little backyard cricket pitch. And he would throw tennis balls at me. And my mother would come at around 8 o'clock, an hour into the session, and say, "What are you doing? He's got to have breakfast." He says, "He's forward defensive first, breakfast later." He was also, and still is, of course, as most lawyers never retire, he still is a practicing attorney in his 72nd year. And his clients would come home to meet him, and my mother would come in desperation then, say, "Oh, you have a consultation, you should go." He said, "Oh, if they've come to see me, they have to wait. I'm working with my son." And of course, at this point, I was very resentful of this. But now when I sit back and I look at those times, I think there are times in any child's life, I think you need a firm little push, maybe a shove in the right direction. And I think that has stood me in very good stead.
Rahul Dravid was sitting where you're sitting this time last year, and he said he was more nervous going into the Bradman oration at the War Memorial than he ever was out in the middle. So I'm wondering how composed you were at Lord's doing the Calvary Spirit of Cricket lecture.
Well, it was nerve-wracking, to be honest. I think when they emailed and called Christopher Martin Jenkins, the late Christopher Martin Jenkins, he was the wonderful gentleman that he was and always will be, called and said, "Would you like to do this?" And I thought about it for about a minute and said, "No, thank you." No chance. Who did it before me? Bishop Desmond Tutu. Anyone heard of him? No? So it was an emphatic no. But then I sat down with my manager, who's also a very, very close friend, Charlie Austin. He's from England. He came on a university tour to Sri Lanka and never left. And we got to talking about the opportunity that, it was, or it presented to me to really stand up in front of a very different crowd, a very different set of people from from various cross-sections of society who looked at cricket from very, very different perspectives to talk about what was really close to my heart, the story of Sri Lankan cricket. So after about a month, I called back and said yes. But when I was not finished with my speech with an hour to the lecture to go, I was panicking. I was just thinking, what do I do? But fortunately for me, I only managed to put about 10 of the audience to sleep. The rest actually listened to it, so it turned out well.
Well, it was particularly interesting because you showed a lot of courage. I mean, many of us in this room understands that politics are inextricably linked with cricket in Sri Lanka, perhaps to a negative effect on many occasions. Is it true that the sports minister actually does have the right of, when he sees what the selectors have chosen, he could in fact sort of just say, not happy here?
If he chose to do so, yes. The constitution of the cricket board and the powers of the sports ministry and the sports minister himself is such that the selectors are appointed by the sports minister, and the final selected 15 or 17 or however number the squad is going to be has to be signed off by the sports minister before it is ratified as the team that's going to represent Sri Lanka. So yes, you're right. Technically, you are right.
Do you know that has that happened to your knowledge?
Well, I think there has been certain instances where, at various stages, I think, from the days the cricket board was put in place, there have been wonderful administrators and of course wonderful sports ministers, but at the same time there have been instances where the laws in place allowed changes to a chosen squad. But at the same time, having said that, it also allows for a weird kind of checks and balances as well, as long as the parties see eye to eye and are working for the greater good of the game.
A lot of people in this room, I think, would find it hard to grasp the fact that you've lived and played most of your career while the country's been at civil war. Tell us about managing a circumstance, proudly representing a country that is at war. You lived through it as a boy, and you've lived through it as a young man with a young family.
Yes, I think we can look at it now, 3 years since the end of the war. And I look back growing up, and now I understand how different the atmosphere was in Sri Lanka. I'm from Kandy up in the hills, very far removed from the war zone. And in 1997, I went to Colombo to actually enter university. I wasn't going anywhere with my cricket also at that time, but I was lucky enough to represent the country when I was 22. But I remember when you were caught in a traffic jam in Colombo, you'd always have that thought in the back of your mind, what can something happen? Because there were quite a few instances of bombs going off in Colombo, suicide bombers coming to Colombo. There were stories of parents who traveled to work by bus, who'd split up and go in 2 different buses because at least one of them would make it home in the evening. Parents were scared to send their children to school. But at the same time, we lived in Colombo, so we did not experience the day-to-day devastation that the war was causing in the war-torn areas, how people were suffering who were caught between a very ruthless terrorist organization and government forces. We couldn't begin to fathom what their lives were like. But we felt the touch of war from time to time when a bomb went off, when there was an assassination in Colombo, when there was civilians killed in the south as well as the north. And cricket in Sri Lanka, it's very different to how you'd see cricket in Australia. It was about, in Australia it's playing, you play to win, you put your best team on the park and you sit and enjoy this wonderful spectacle. In Sri Lanka it was quite different. Of course we still wanted to win, but the Sri Lankan cricket team, because we transcended all the petty politics, the petty social ignorance that was prevalent in Sri Lanka for years. We were seen as kind of the ideal representation of what Sri Lankan society should be. We had Sinhalese, we had Tamils, we had Muslims, we had Burghers, we had Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims. You name it, we had someone who was playing in the national side. So for the people, it was an escape from reality. It was an escape to this wonderful sport where they could take refuge from reality. And you could see everyone in Colombo, work would stop when we played cricket. They'd throng to, they'd actually, probably companies in Sri Lanka, I think, are completely anti-cricket. It's a wonder we find sponsors because productivity, zero on the day of a cricket match. And you'd see all these people just embrace this team as their own. They didn't see anything different from one person to the next, from one team member to the next. They didn't see them as Sinhalese, Tamil, Muslim, Burgher. They saw them as being theirs. It was our team, our boys, the Sri Lankans used to call the team. And it was a unifying force. And cricket, I'm very proud to have been part of a team that has, at every single moment, lived up to that with a lot of pride, with a lot of passion, and has never forgotten that for Sri Lanka, cricket is more than a game, and it'll always be so. And I think it's a great privilege for us to be able to do what we do for Sri Lanka.
Has that circumstance heightened your sense of social justice? Heightened your sense of wanting to contribute? You're a firm believer that the game can be a force for good, aren't you?
Well, I think it has been in Sri Lanka, and it'll continue to be so in Sri Lanka and across the world. I think cricketers nowadays, after World Series cricket in Australia, and of course with the IPL, with the advent of India as a powerhouse in international cricket, cricketers have gone from being sportsmen to superstars. And it's very easy for us to lose sight of the fact that what's allowed us to do that is the ordinary fan, the little child who tells his father, I want to go and see Sanat Jayasuriya bat. I want to go and see Sachin Tendulkar bat. I want to see Shane Warne bowl, Murali bowl. And they are the ones who pay the money, who watch the TV adverts. They're the ones who come day in, day out in the heat, in the cold, and who contribute to their hard-earned finances for us to be who we are, for us to be able to entertain them, for us to be able to have our lifestyle that we do, to own the cars if you're a car fan, or, to buy a house, whatever we do. I think we must never lose sight of the fact that we are privileged to be allowed to do so. And if we ever forget that, I think that's the first sign of decline in any cricketer. And so if we have the opportunity to be who we are, I think it's definitely our duty to give back, and to give back not just once, but as much as we can. And again, they have provided us with the opportunity and the ability to do so. And I think it comes naturally to a lot of cricketers, not just to me. You take Australia, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, England, any cricketing country in the world, any cricket player, any team, you'll find that they are passionate about that concept.
It's nearly 4 years